Welcome, everyone, to the May 11th City Council work session. Welcome to everyone here and at home. And we have two issues today. First one up is Avago Technologies Enterprise Zone Investment. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and I'll just turn it over to Denny to take us from here.
So good afternoon. It's been a long 7 years since the Hynix facility ceased operations here in West Eugene, and so I'm actually really excited to be here today to talk about Avago Technologies and a proposed major reinvestment in that facility. And I think we actually have someone from the company here. I saw him earlier. He may be walking in currently. Steve Woolley, who's a manufacturing engineering manager for Avago. They're in town doing some preliminary design work on the facility, so it's great to have him here. And I would just offer a big welcome and a thank you for considering Eugene for Avago. It's great that they're here. Avago Technologies purchased Hynix property in November, and they're proposing a major reinvestment, basically to bring that facility back into productive reuse. Several folks have looked at that property over the years. I've been part of many efforts taking different uses through the facility, data centers, solar companies. And generally, as they exited that building, it's like this is a single-purpose facility. It was basically built for semiconductor manufacturing, and it was really getting to the point that this building might even be towards the end of its useful life because it had been sitting there vacant for a long time. We're very fortunate that Avago discovered the property, and I think the fact that this property went to auction and it was sold at a very deep discount is kind of evidence that this property could have been at the end of its useful life. So we feel, again, very confident or very fortunate that there's a proposed reuse. They're proposing a new investment of $400 million. Avago has submitted an enterprise zone authorization application, which is really a precursor to be eligible for the standard 3-year property tax exemption that's available in our West Eugene enterprise zone. Avago's application also included a request for a 2-year extension, which means that 3-year extension or 3-year exemption could be extended up to 5 years. It doesn't have to be 5 years. It could be 4 or 5 years. And that's a special consideration in the Enterprise Zone program, and it's a consideration that has to be approved by the City Council and the Lane County Board, given that we're joint sponsors of the West Eugene Enterprise Zone. I'm not going to get too deep into the enterprise zone, but I just want to cover some basics. It's been a while since we've talked about it. Our West Eugene zone was established in 2005. If you recall, we also had an enterprise zone from 1985 to 1995, and then there was a period for about 10 years where we didn't have an enterprise zone. The current zone was reestablished with an in-depth public process. We had a committee, several public hearings. Councilor Surratt was actually on that committee way back when, and she might remember some of it. It was the better part of almost a year, as I recall, process that basically adopted some local public benefit criteria as part of our local enterprise zone program. There's a copy actually of the criteria. It wasn't in the packet. We require companies to kind of sign an acknowledgement that we have public benefit criteria, and you can see there that the public benefit criteria includes things like wages, benefits, training, advancement opportunities, health insurance, other employee benefits like child care, life insurance, property sharing, time off, retirement plans, etc. Support for small businesses, redevelopment of existing facilities, local referral agency hiring, and responsible construction goals, and investment size. So basically the way the criteria works is companies, the last 25% of their tax exemption, so to speak, is conditioned on meeting this criteria, and if they don't meet all of it or some of it, we basically claw back, I guess is the technical term, or non-technical term. We require a payment in lieu of the tax exemption back up to 25% of the tax exemption. Our enterprise zone expires on June 30th. We'll be back in a couple weeks to discuss the overall program and council's interest in continuing the program. But basically, there are 69 enterprise zones in the state. There are 7 in Lane County: Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove, Veneta, Florence, Oak Ridge, and Junction City, Harrisburg, which is a Lane and Lane County zone. I won't cover all the program details. We put a lot of that in the agenda item write-up, but basically manufacturing companies that are in the zone and that are increasing employment by 10% receive the standard 3-year property tax exemption. If you're a new company, by state statute, you're really only required to create one job, but if you look in our public benefit criteria, we have a local cap that we've put in our criteria that really caps the tax exemption at $32,000 per job per year. And the penalty being that if you exceed that cap, again, there's a repayment provision that you could have to repay up to a third of that tax exemption benefit. It's important to note that Avago's investment is eligible for the 3-year property tax exemption. So in a sense, it's theirs by right, by being in the zone, creating jobs, investing in the zone. So council doesn't approve the 3-year exemption, but they do have to act on the 2-year extension request, as does the county board. And they don't lose the 3-year exemption if the 2 years isn't granted. So the 2-year extension, again, it's available via state statutes. It's in the state statutes. The criteria is that a company has to provide annual compensation that's equal to 150% of the average county wage, and that's an important distinction. It's the compensation, which includes wages and benefits, has to be 150% of the average county wage. For Lane County, the average wage is $39,382, and 150% of that is $59,073. They also have to abide by any additional conditions that the zone sponsor might put on that extension, and we'll talk about that in a second. But generally, they have to be reasonable conditions. They have to be related to the public purpose of the program, and you cannot claw back, so to speak, more than a third of the benefit based on those conditions. They also have to enter in a written agreement basically confirming what those conditions are. Eugene has not really dealt with the 2-year extension request in recent history. Other zones, enterprise zones, have. Springfield, for example, the recent Swanson Mill that was rebuilt got the 2-year extension. Symantec, International Paper, those larger investments in Springfield have been granted the 2-year extension. Some examples of additional criteria. I think the obvious one is job retention. If extensions are granted, I think there's an expectation, and Avago's expectation would be that they need to maintain a certain level of employment to get the extension. In Springfield, for example, they've gone with a kind of a flat annual payment as a condition of their 2-year extension. For example, in International Paper, they're required to pay $100,000 a year over the 5-year period, and that's divided amongst the taxing jurisdictions. That was a little bit different because they asked for the employment waiver because they were making a major reinvestment without creating any new jobs, so that was a little bit different than this one. Other ideas or other things that we've seen across the state are things related to job training programs, education programs, things that provide mutual benefit to those companies and the community. We've had some initial conversations with the company, and basically since they'll be providing kind of the next generation of technology-focused jobs, we've had conversations focused on investments that could make in return for the extension some investments that would really prepare the workforce for those next generations of jobs. For example, the Lane Workforce Partnership has a youth work experience program. There's about 6,000 youth between 16 and 24 that are either without home, without a job, in school, and they have a program that captures those and gives them real work experience. There's a great need, severely underfunded. That might be a good match with some of the needs of the company in preparing those youth for future jobs. Other examples would be LCC job training programs that prepare our workforce for technology jobs. So again, just moving a little bit to the Avago investment, it's $400 million. It's $100 million in building improvements, $300 million in equipment. They're indicated a minimum job creation of 229 jobs. Avago's history is that they spun out of Hewlett-Packard. They've also recently acquired Broadcom, which was actually a company that was larger than Avago. So you'll see Broadcom used sometime Avago, and they'll probably continue legally as Avago and the property ownership and so forth, but you'll commonly see Broadcom as well because those two have emerged. So think of them as one and the same. The Eugene facility will be an Avago wireless manufacturing operation. Basically, they manufacture wafers, but they're transmission devices that generally make cell phones work. So, anything that a cell phone needs to transmit information out and information in, and this is the technology that really makes cell phones work. They don't manufacture cell phones. If cell phones go away one day, we assume that whatever device replaces them will still need that transmission device. So it's a much higher end product. It's different than Hynix. They were memory chips, and that was kind of a race to the bottom. Whoever could manufacture it cheapest and keep their head above water survived. This is different. This is a very niche, higher end product. This is expansion of a facility similar to the one in Fort Collins. The Hynix facility is actually very similar in size. There are 1,300 employees in their Fort Collins facility. They have about a $50 million payroll there, and they're actually the largest taxpayer in Fort Collins at this point. And I think it would be best to characterize where they are currently in the Eugene facility is that they've purchased the property, they've started design work, that's why they're in town today or this week, so that when the opportunity arises, they will be able to start construction in a timely manner. So basically there's some work that needs to happen before they actually start construction. As far as community benefit, discussions involving tax exemptions have tended to be fairly contentious, and there's always debate from both sides about the need for the exemption, cause and effect, but for arguments around investments and exemptions. And I'm sure this exemption will involve some of that debate as well. But for the purpose of framing this exemption request, I think it's important to start this discussion with really a look at where we've been historically with the facility, where we are today with the facility, and really what the future holds for this facility. Ultimately, we need to be able to demonstrate that there's both a short-term and a long-term benefit provided by this enterprise zone investment and the requested exemption. So quickly, where we are or where we've been, we're all familiar with the Hynix facility. They spent about $2 billion building, equipping, re-equipping that facility. All of their investments received the standard 3-year enterprise zone tax exemption, with the exception of the last exemption, which had to be repaid when they shut down the plant. Even with the tax exemptions, Hynix was our largest taxpayer when they were in operation. They were larger than the next 9 largest taxpayers combined. And at their peak, they were paying about $6 million a year in property taxes. And I think before they closed, they were paying about $4 million in property taxes. There was over 1,000 jobs there. They generated local annual payroll of over $50 million. That payroll has a significant ripple effect, and if you've used multiplier calculations and other things, I think it'd be easy to kind of conclude that payroll, the vendors, the suppliers, probably created about $100 million benefit for the community annually. So fast forward to today, of course the facility's vacant. It's been vacant for over 7 years. There's no jobs there, no payroll. Annual property taxes currently are about $590,000 a year. They're still one of the largest taxpayers despite the fact that the building's vacant. But it's safe to say we took a pretty big hit if you think about something in the neighborhood of $100 million in local economic benefit, and now it's dwindled down to the tax revenue at about $490,000. As we look to the future, the opportunity for Avago to put a facility back into productive reuse, put in place a $400 million investment. We estimate that the 3-year tax exemption for the Avago investment would be about $14 million. If you look at it and stretch it over 5 years, that's an additional $7 million in tax exemption. So it would be a total of roughly $21 million of tax exemption. The city's share of that would be around $6 million for the 5-year and about $3 million. I'm sorry, $6 million for the 3-year and about $3 million for the extra 2 years. This is a preliminary estimate. There's a lot that we don't know about the equipment and its value and so forth, so it's really an estimate at this point. Again, 229 jobs. If you take 150%, we would project an annual payroll of about $13.5 million. And over a 3-year period, that's about a $40 million payroll benefit to the community. Over 5 years, about a $67 million payroll benefit to the community. Again, if you take in the ripple effects, the support services, all the other things, we would forecast that the outcome would be significantly more than the tax exemption value. So just to close, clearly this is a large investment. The corresponding tax exemption is also a big number. We understand that we need to carefully consider the extension request ultimately ended up in a place where the company not only moves forward with this investment, but also continues to invest in Eugene, adds jobs in Eugene, and remains in our community for a long time. Again, we're very fortunate. We're excited about having Avago consider Eugene as their home. I think they present a tremendous opportunity for our regional prosperity. I've been impressed with the conversations that we have. They have a history in Oregon back in the Hewlett-Packard days. They have a similar facility in Colorado. I think Oregon and Colorado share a lot of goals around sustainability and the environment, and they appear to have that culture already embedded in their organization. And again, considering where we've been with this facility, where we were just a short few months ago with this facility, it's really hard to imagine that there's a better outcome than we're looking at today. So today we're not seeking any action. We want to provide background. We want to answer any questions you have, hear what other information you might need as we bring this forward, and council would consider take action at a future date.
Thank you. So I've got 2 people in the queue, and I just want to ask a question on this sheet on Exhibit A, the small business part. I don't understand why the more employees, the reduction in points.
As I recall, the public benefit criteria was, the intent was to help the small companies and give them some benefit for being a small company, because it's going to be harder for them to meet other criteria, wages, benefits. So the idea is we didn't want to disadvantage small local companies.
Got it. Thank you for that. Okay, I've got Mike and Betty in the queue. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor.
Georgia.
So is this working? It's a little quieter this time. Just to understand all of this in context, you just mentioned that, did I hear you right, that Hynix during its operation had a $100 million effect on the local economy every year?
We haven't actually done a true calculation, but if you just take the property taxes, the payroll, the ripple effects, the suppliers, the vendors, I think it would be pretty easy to get to something in the neighborhood of $100 million. Of course, we haven't done that recently. They're gone, but...
I asked that because one of the things we talk about at the table is there's another part of our economy locally that we value incredibly, but that the arts in Lane County provide nearly $45 million a year in their economic impact. So what you're saying is that one employer, that one facility provided more than twice the amount of all the arts in Lane County in terms of economic impact.
I think you just said that, but yeah.
Right. Okay. I want to understand it in context. That's what I'm trying to do. You said also, I think, that our local 150% number is 59,000.
That is 150% of the average county wage, yes.
Right. Do you happen to know, and I understand if you didn't, do you happen to know the average wage paid by Avago in Fort Collins?
We do not have that information currently, but I think they represent around a $50 million payroll for 1,300 jobs.
Okay. More context. How big is their facility in Fort Collins?
It's almost identical as the Hynix facility, which is roughly 1 million square feet. They're not going to use, our understanding is they're not going to use all of the Hynix facility on day one. There's plenty of expansion opportunity because they're only going to use a portion of it initially.
But it's nearly exactly the same size?
Generally, yes.
And they employ 1,300 people in Fort Collins. And they're starting at 229 here?
Yes.
And the plan is eventually for it to operate similarly?
We hope so. And it really depends on the market, and they haven't really talked about future plans. They're really just trying to figure out this first phase.
Sure.
But the market opportunities drive, I think, future expansion, obviously.
I always hesitate with when we talk about tax concessions, tax breaks for folks. I see this kind of situation as a very, much like I think I mentioned the other night at a thing, there's a very symbiotic relationship here. We need them and they need us kind of thing. Remembering that Hynix, even when they were, and by the way, how long did Hynix operate in the marketplace, just out of curiosity?
They closed in 2008, and I think they started construction in 95, so they were probably operating in 97, 98-ish. So about 10 years, roughly.
About 10 years. So they had, and they were not subject to the last 2 years, or they were?
Did they get a 2-year
Yeah.
extension? No, they did not. I think for one of their, as I recall, one of their expansions, they requested it, but it was not granted.
That's, well, we see the effects. Let me see. Another question. Now it's left me, so I guess I'll think about it a little bit more and maybe take a second round, Mayor. Thank you.
I do want to point out a couple things before I move to Betty. One is that when Hynix left, the folks made it very clear to us who ran the place that they would like to have stayed. They were not leaving because they wanted to leave. They were leaving because the business wasn't there anymore. But they were very clear that they liked being here and liked this community a lot. And then on another thing is the Avago folks indicated that they didn't want to tie themselves down to numbers about the expansion possibilities. They were clear they were going to start out with a smaller number, and over time they fully expect to expand, but they did not want at this time to commit themselves to a specific number. So that's how I heard what they said. Okay, Betty.
Thank you. That you mentioned, I'm glad that you're not asking for any action today. It gives the public a chance to hear about what we're contemplating and express their opinions. You mentioned Hynix. They left a lot of unemployed people, and a lot of those people came here for the jobs, and then they were left with no jobs. Also, Hynix was always bragging about how much they were paying, and they talked about average wages. Average wage doesn't tell you the wage of the lowest paid people. I met a man who had been working there 3 years who was making $13 an hour, and he had to have food stamps to exist. And all the time they were bragging about how much they paid, but there were high paid people there, but there were also the real workers were not being paid well, and they were working under I'm not saying this company would be exactly the same, but they're working under very difficult conditions. They had to change all their clothes before they took a break because of the nature of the work, and they had 15 minutes to take off their booties and their outer clothes and go and have a quick break and come back and get all of those things back on, which is not a good way to work. This, I see that we're required. Well, question: are we compelled to give the 3-year tax break? You say there's no way out of that. Is that right?
It's available to companies that meet the basic state criteria, which this would. So it's theirs by right as long as they meet the job creation criteria and follow the program.
The criteria are such that anybody could meet them, enough points.
Anyone who meets the state statutes as far as type of company, size of investment, job creation can get the
I know,
exemption.
if you start adding them up, anybody could meet the basic criteria. And will they not develop if we don't give them the extra 2 years?
I can't answer that because I don't know. A lot of these investment decisions have to do with a lot of different things, feasibility, labor force, water supply, power costs, incentives, on and on and on. So
whether they've used up their tax breaks. People all over the country cities are finding that they give tax breaks to lure a company, and then they use up the tax break and they leave because another city will give them tax breaks. And the people are left, the city they leave are left with not getting the taxes they got accustomed to, and left with a lot of people who need help. I guess you can guess I'm against this, but can't they afford to pay taxes?
Haven't seen their financials, so I can't answer that.
I would think they could afford it better than most of our citizens can. Okay, I will vote against. I would vote against the whole thing if I could, but I would definitely vote against giving an extension at this point. I think we should be aware that if people learn that there are jobs, a lot of people are going to come to town looking for those jobs, and there won't be enough jobs for the people, and then when the jobs are gone, the people are left, which is what happened with Hynix. Thank you.
George?
Thank you, Mayor. So, just to kind of ask again one of Councilor Taylor's questions, the 3-year exemption is not a council decision.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's you and someone from Lane County.
Yeah, and
Tax assessment.
it's not a decision necessarily. It's a review. Do they meet the criteria? And if they do, in a sense, we're obligated to approve that because they've met all the state statutory requirements.
Yeah, I don't have a particular problem with that. But who are you working with from Lane County Assessment and Taxation on this? They're a partner,
The
right?
staff person
Yes.
is Peter Rieksecker.
Okay, thank you. Okay, but council does have a decision on the 2-year extension.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I've got a whole list of questions here, and it would have been helpful to have this information in our packet last week. It was developed in 2006, I see, because maybe some of my questions might be answered in here, but I'll just go ahead and start with them. So does the same criteria, this criteria apply for both the 3-year period, the initial period, and the 2-year extension, as far as wages and
Yes, and it
health
applies
insurance and all that?
It applies for
Okay.
But again, the council could put other conditions that aren't these on the 2-year extension.
Yeah.
You would have some latitude to do that.
Okay. Well, Councilor Taylor pointed out something that I'm going to discuss too. What we're seeing here is, the 150% of the average county wage of $39,000 comes to $59,000. But that's just an average. I mean, the managers and the supervisors are going to be making well over $100,000. There'll be several people. The top management, of course, will be probably in San Jose, is my guess. There's going to be a lot of people making under that average. Do we know what the lowest wage will be?
No, they haven't shared all the job classifications. This is an extension of the company. So a lot of the upper management will be not here. You'll probably have a plant manager, an operation manager. Of course, there's engineers. This is high tech, so there will be some high-paying jobs available that are engineer-related and technology-related. And there's plenty of production jobs and shipping and handling and all those things. That's a standard. But I wouldn't expect there to be a big layer of management position, because that in accounting and all those things, is that generally that's going to happen at their headquarters or someone else, is what
Sure.
we would assume.
Yeah, I understand that. But I'm just saying, what I'm saying is the average wage may be $59,000 a year, but there will be many, many, many workers making a lot less than that because it's just an average. And there'll be more people below that level. What about do we know how many contract workers there are going to be, where their wages would not apply to these criteria?
No, they don't. We only for enterprise zone via, again, the state statutes, only the people employed by the company count. I think in the Hynix example, there were hundreds of contractor type employment associated with the plant that weren't employees, maybe 300, 400. So, there will be, a similar equation here where there might be 100 or so contracted employees, but
Sure,
we're not considering those as part of this.
Janitorial, landscaping, things like that. Sure. Well, they're going to be making a heck of a lot less than $59,000 in their wages. So, this is something we really need to consider when we consider the 2-year extension. I mean, I think the 3-year exemption is fine. I don't have any objections. I voted for a couple other ones for a brewery and someone else, but they were not asking for a 5-year exemptions. And until we know more about what people are actually going to be making, I'm very reluctant. I would be very reluctant to approve the 2-year extension. I'll need another round, Mayor. Thank you.
Just to remind everybody, I'm going to be aiming at 12:45 to end this particular discussion today. Claire?
Thank you. Well, full disclosure, my husband worked at both Sony and Hynix, two local companies that benefited from this particular tax exemption program. And Hynix, as the mayor pointed out, did leave because of market forces and tariff changes in the industry, and not because of any issue with workers in Eugene or the community. They really actually loved being here. Councilor Taylor's right. Many people lost work after that, and some of those folks are still around and would likely be ready to apply when Avago is ready to take their application. So that, I think, is a really exciting aspect to this, that we might have folks who have that skill, who've been totally underutilized in the work they've been doing in the last 7 years, able to come back into that industry. And, you know, just in terms of that history, Hynix was definitely the better employer between Hynix and Sony. Sony did pick up and leave right at pretty much at the end of their tax exemption, and there's some other aspects there I could share if anyone's interested in. And Hynix, you know, I think really did bring a great benefit to the local economy. So I understand the importance of having a new semiconductor manufacturer come back to that location in terms of jobs, tax revenue, and other benefits that a solid employer brings. Right now, I'm not ready to support an extension for the 2 years, but that's not because of any negative feeling towards this future employer. So Denny, do you have an idea of when they hope to begin work and when we might see their new investment that would actually create new taxable property?
Yes, and I think working backwards, as they've indicated in the materials they submitted as part of their enterprise zone application, 2019, say the start of the calendar year 2019, would be when they would actually be in production. And so the property that's already there stays on the tax roll, so we'll still be getting that. It's only the new investment. So the tax exemption would kick in probably in 2020 if they went into production in 2019. But that could change. That's just a forecast at this point.
I understand, yeah.
So they're now working on design. There's building to construction, and then there's the tool equipment installation, which takes the better part of a year. So, you know, it might be a couple years worth of just construction and installation. So it's a big project. $400 million is a big project, and it's a lot that has to go into reconfiguring that building.
Yeah. And then George asked one of my questions about where the public benefit criteria applies to all the years or just the extension. And I know you say you're going to come back and we'll have a work session just on the program itself, and I think we may want to look at tweaking some of this criteria because, you know, we didn't have the Affordable Care Act when this was implemented, and we weren't raising the minimum wage, and so there might be some places we want to make adjustments to take into account those new realities. And then I think in our packet you noted that for that 2-year extension, and you kind of referred to it here, the council could create additional criteria that we ask the company to meet in order to grant that extension. Right now, it's not clear to me what we might ask for, but being able to see some kind of investment during those first few years, you know, in those first 5 years in the community, whatever we might identify if we consider that, I think would be important. So whether that's helping with park amenities or some other kind of obvious public benefit that would be more immediate while they have that tax exemption, I think would be a real show of goodwill. So just putting that out there.
George Poling?
Thank you. Under the public benefit criteria, now when Hynix was here, they put millions of dollars into the education system, 4J Bethel LCC. Was that under a public benefit, or was that sort of a contribution in lieu of taxes? Remember?
There were some cases, and you're testing my memory here, but
Mine too, that's why I asked.
we did have I think they requested an employment waiver at one point because they were retooling, not creating new jobs, preserving those jobs, and as part of that agreement, we had an escrow agreement where they had to pay the taxes up front, and some of it got distributed to the schools and so forth. And so, yes, we did that. I don't have all the details, but I know that was part of a prior enterprise zone deal that we had. Not for the initial, but a subsequent investment.
So, in addition to that, the company voluntarily put a lot of money back into the community through the nonprofits, through charitable organizations, and other things. Such as the computers to the schools and things. So, you were talking about the enterprise zone getting ready to expire. What happens when an enterprise zone, say ours, expires? Are there other areas in the state waiting to apply to establish one?
Yeah, that used to be the case. We used to, when we applied the last time, we were in a competitive environment. Now, basically, the state allows anyone to have an enterprise zone who wants it, generally speaking. You still have to apply for it. Council still would have to pass a resolution to apply for it. But, it wasn't too long ago there were 55 zones, now there's 69, so it's growing, and mostly because they've opened it up and not made it competitive. If you remember, the electronic commerce zone was as an overlay. However, that's competitive. There's a few of those available, and we'll talk about that when we come back in a couple weeks.
I guess I should do a full disclosure also. My wife worked for Hynex for almost the entire time that they operated out there. Prior to get hiring on full-time, she was also doing contract work. So just to be upfront and honest about it. I see that Sarah Means is here from the county. She's the newly appointed Lane County Economic and Community and Economic Development Manager. Would this be an appropriate time to maybe ask her to give her perspective of what the county is looking at this, or would that be better done at another meeting? Or
I think I can address that. We are actually planning to go to the county and do a similar overview of this request, and also talk about the program extension, kind of in line with the discussion we're having with council, so that we're kind of moving at the same pace. So we're going to be on their calendar. I think we come to council on the 23rd. I think we're on the county agenda on the 24th, and we'll talk about Avago and the future of the program. So we're working very closely with Sarah and her staff to make sure the county's brought along with us.
Okay.
Where they fall on support and so forth, we don't know that yet. We haven't had a conversation with them.
Okay. And then, there's been some talk about the people that were laid off once Hynex closed and left the community. But, a lot of these people that were originally hired were laid off and displaced timber workers that were retrained and given new skills. And once Hynex did leave, a lot of the people that were here, they did get the transferable skills. They also, many of them earned engineering degrees and moved on, and they also received education reimbursement. So, it's not all that bad when you look at the big picture, and to single out what happened based on a global economy and blame a company for all the bad things. I think it serves us well to remember that all the good things definitely outweighs that. So we need to remember doing that also. So as far as any decision at this point, I too would like to get some more information on from the company, from what some of the questions that Betty and George and Claire brought up so far.
Chris?
Thank you. It's always good process when you have a meeting to talk about things without asking for a decision, because you do need a couple of meetings and more information in order to do that. So I wouldn't expect anybody to want to be able to make a decision today. So I agree with that as a good way to do things. I'm also intrigued by the amount of time we are spending talking about Hynex. This isn't Hynex. This is Avago. They're two completely different companies. And I understand that the only point of reference we have is what our experience was with Hynex, but we can't assume that every experience is going to be the same, or that everything is going to happen the way it happened before. In the interest of disclosure, my son also worked at Hynex. He was one of those young, low entry-level positions. And he got a good salary and good benefits. He was not in a minimum wage sweatshop by any stretch. This was a good job, one of those 1,000 good jobs. And they were local people. When I was on the school board, we received a letter from Hynix thanking us for the number of high-quality local people they were able to employ, unsolicited. So they didn't import a lot of workers. So that's the last I'll talk about Hynix, because I said this is not about Hynix. So the question today is, will Avago represent a good investment for the community? Will what we are proposing to put in as our part be equaled or exceeded by what they're proposing to put in? And as Claire and I, who served together on the original Enterprise Zone Design Committee, remember, we stuck a lot of conditions in the Enterprise Zone requirements in order to ensure that there would be a good benefit, both in employment and economic impact in any Enterprise Zone request or application. We didn't just say, well, you know, if you kind of hold a mirror up to your nose and you're breathing, you get the money. I think we did a good job of ensuring that there was going to be a benefit. And this many jobs with this much payroll and benefits, I think is more than a multiplier for what might be invested in taxes. And some of the things that they're proposing to do are exciting to me as well. They talked about investing in youth employment training. I just had a presentation yesterday that talked about what are some of the key elements that cause kids to run away from home or kids to become homeless, and what could get them back. And one of the highest ranked elements was help in getting a job. I mean, if you have a job, you have stability, and that's what keeps people off the street. So to me, that's a very important consideration, and I realize it's peripheral, but it's also important. So let's keep the conversation to this discussion and bring us the information about this particular transaction.
So I've got two more people in the queue, and we've got a few minutes. I just want to make a point. And to me, all of our regional economic prosperity work has been really aimed at trying to provide jobs and opportunity for the people in our community so that they can raise their families and do well. And this is, I think that's key to what we have to keep in mind as we look at this, because if there's one thing I've heard from people over and over again, they want us paying attention to jobs. They want us paying attention to underemployment and unemployment. They want us to put that at the top of the list. And even when you talk about some of our unhoused population, some of them came and didn't get jobs they needed, and they got in trouble. So I think there's something really important here about how we use this opportunity to leverage what our families need, and that we put it in that context. And I think it's really important, this piece that we've been talking about in the regional prosperity context has been about how we make that link between school and employment and job opportunities for our young people. And I think we should be looking at this not as we have to think up some reason why they qualify. It's what can they do that will move the dial on the things that we've already said we care about. And we should really focus hard on those things that we've already put out in front of us that we want to have do better with in this community. And I think we know within the tech sector there's a linkage that needs to be made between our schools and jobs. And this is an opportunity to try to focus on that and really set up our kids for a good future. So I just encourage you all to really, as you think about this, think not just in terms of what are they going to do for us, but think in terms of how they make us achieve the goals that we've put in front of us as a council and as a community. Mike, you're next.
Thank you, Mayor. To take off on that, I think a lot of the times that we get into difficulty with local conversations or conflict, it's often with competing ideas over who we all are or what our competing visions are of our community. But this is one of those that crosses all of those borders and tends to be a very common sort of idea, bigger picture, that as a community, couple of things. Number one, manufacturing, and specifically high-tech manufacturing, is almost everyone's goal, especially when we talk at the level of elected officials about what kind of jobs do we want to see more of in our community. High-tech manufacturing is almost always at the top of the list. So there could barely be a better kind of opportunity for us to accomplish our own goals. And that's really, I think, I agree with the mayor on that kind of way of thinking about it. There's a context piece, though, that's important to me, and it's this. We know that Hynix spent $2 billion building this facility in the first place, and they got it for $20 million? Seems like almost nothing.
Yeah, most of the equipment is where the value is, and a lot of that is being removed. So really, it's a shell of.
So they haven't put the $300 million or $400 million in equipment in yet, correct?
They haven't. They've done nothing at this point other than purchase the property.
And in the scheme of things, this is almost, from their perspective, it's almost dumb not to buy this at auction because you'd never be able to build one for that kind of price, right? So whether or not they can move forward and get it all done and get it taken care of is another matter of the planning and the process and how we interact with them too, I suppose. Would you say that's an integral part of this?
Yes, I think the way it's been characterized is the auction brought forward an opportunity maybe before its time. They weren't quite ready to expand, but this was an opportunity that brought itself to them. And so now they're working into the planning phase, design phase, and so yeah, it's they don't have a firm start date because there's a lot of things maybe still up in the air.
Mm-hmm. So it behooves us to be a good partner, a good host, a good community, symbiotic kind of partner in this process, I would think, in order to make sure that they're able to or want to. Yes?
I think that's something we always want to do, yes. And
okay.
So, yeah,
well, I mean, we have a lot of different opinions in this community. There's some people who would not, who behave in ways that I don't always understand. And so I just want to have that conversation as clearly as possible. Thanks.
Rich Brown, this will be the last.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, I have a question about clawbacks. That is, penalties to repay the exemption if the plant shuts down early before the end of the 5-year. Well, certainly we don't know about the extra 2 years yet. Kind of like with what happened with Hynix. And God forbid that would happen. I don't wish that. I mean, the $400 million investment, even for a big company like Avago Broadcom, it's risk. It's a risk. It's a serious risk. They've determined that it is a good risk, and that's what you do when you're in business. You have to spend money and you have to take risks in order to grow your business. I know that from personal experience. So you try to make sure that you're taking a good risk and you minimize all things that could go wrong. And I'm willing to support. I mean, I couldn't deny the 3-year exemption if I wanted to, but I wouldn't want to. I think it's a very reasonable thing to do. But who? So I mean, are there clawbacks? I mean, maybe even here, are there anything mentioned in here?
What you're not seeing is the state statutes, which are a couple hundred pages.
I haven't printed those out yet.
A couple hundred pages of enterprise zone statutes.
Okay.
The clawback provisions for curtailing employment is the technical term, are all in state statutes. So even though you might only be required to create one job, once you reach peak employment, you can't curtail employment below a certain threshold and still maintain your tax exemption. So that's where Hynix ended up being penalized. They had reached peak employment. They curtailed it below a certain threshold, so they were disqualified. And even though they had a few people still working there, they were disqualified.
So those criteria would apply to Avago?
It's in the state statute.
In the statutory requirement. Okay, thank you. Who will actually monitor compliance with all the public benefit criteria?
We do that as the zone manager. Even though we're joint sponsors with the county, we take the role of the zone manager, which is an official designation, and so we gather information. It's a worksheet. It's kind of like doing your tax returns every year where you have to score, and based on how you score in the public benefit, some companies are subject to repayment. Most aren't, and that's good. We want people to meet the criteria, and we don't want to recapture the tax exemption because we
Right.
want them to pay well and so forth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But I'm just wondering, how's that going to be? Are you going to examine payroll sheets and equipment invoices? What if, let's just say that they estimated high on the equipment costs and that actually it's less than what they estimated, but they're getting, will there be any kind of a cut back on the 21 million total 5-year exemption?
Now, the way the enterprise zone works, and again, this is all in state statute, is when we authorize the tax exemption via the application, the approval process, you're actually authorizing the investment, not a specific dollar amount. So that new investment will receive a tax exemption. And you have to reasonably describe what that investment is. So, I mean, we can almost guarantee that it's not going to be $400 million. It's going to be a little more or a little less, and
Right.
that's okay
Yeah.
via the state statute. So therefore, the exemption is going to be a little bit smaller, a little bit less, depending on what is actually done there. So there is a little bit of elasticity in what that investment is, and that's okay.
Sure.
'Cause
I understand.
usually at the start, they don't know exactly what they're going to do.
Yeah, okay. So we don't know that the exemption we don't actually know that it will be $21 million total. It could be
I would be very
less than
cautious
that,
in assuming
perhaps.
that's the number because
Sure. It could be less.
semiconductor equipment, there's special depreciation for fab equipment, for clean room equipment, for the building, for the utility building. And so until we have more information, we're not going to be able to forecast that with precision. We think it's a pretty good estimate, but it's going to be a little bit higher or lower probably.
It could go up or down.
Yes.
Okay. Within a certain range. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to wind up this work session. Thank you, Denny, and
Thank you.
appreciate the conversation. Next, we're heading into housing and homelessness update.
Whenever you're ready.
Hey, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. We're happy to be here today to provide you an update on housing and homeless work that the city is currently involved in. And this is actually a presentation that we have coordinated with folks that will be providing you additional information during the Budget Committee presentation on human services next week, of which Stephanie will be a part of. So we won't cover everything that we're doing today. As you know, we're doing an awful lot, but we are going to provide you information that is new to some of the programs with which you're already familiar. And Jason Dudrick is here today too. The three of us, and the city manager included, represent just a handful of folks that work at the city that work on both housing and homelessness, and I just want to acknowledge that because we don't always have three people sitting at the table, but we really are just the tip of the iceberg. Every department works on this issue, and while we can't present all of their work today, I just want to make sure that we all remember that. And also that the City of Eugene is just one agency in the area that's thinking about this. It's a national issue, and we're doing our part, and we'll also spend some time today talking about the work that others are doing. I just want to name some of the partners and agencies that work on this: Lane County, University of Oregon, St. Vincent de Paul, the Mission, Whitebird. I could go on, but I'll start with those. So our presentation today will start with City of Eugene efforts. Again, we won't be covering all of them, but there are a couple of areas that we'd like to provide you an update on because we have some new information in a couple of areas. We'll then move to regional work, and Stephanie will provide you an update on the work of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, as well as other regional work that's occurring. And finally, we'll provide you with a brief update on legislation that we can expect to see coming out of the state. So new information that just came out yesterday, and we passed around a copy here, is the 2016 point-in-time homeless count. And we have some work to do to learn more about these numbers, but we did want to bring them to your attention because they came out yesterday. So the total number of homeless folks counted in January, it was at 451, which is down slightly from 1,473 last year. Unsheltered numbers are up to 934 from 716 last year. And emergency sheltered folks has actually gone down from 656 last year to 405 this year. This does not represent the number of people that are in permanent supported housing, so housing reserved for homeless folks, and that number is at 644. And then also a reminder that our rest stop programs and OVE are counted in that unsheltered number. So all of this points to the need in our area for a balanced approach. We need both emergency shelter and longer-term solutions. And so we're going to talk about both of those today. So first, I want to provide you an update on the Rest Stop program. There is a change coming in June because there are six rest stops currently authorized. Those are the Safe Spot at Garfield, the 2 rest stops at Lane County Behavioral Health, the Veterans Stop at the Mission, and then 2 authorized at Northwest Expressway, one of which is being operated now. And Eric DeBurr has indicated that community-supported shelters will reopen a second rest stop at that location. So I wanted to make you aware of that today. In 2015, rest stops were home to 214 people, and those folks volunteered 555 hours in 2015, most of which took place in city parks, providing work to maintain the city parks. So I think we can say, and I know that you acknowledged when you last extended the rest stop ordinance, that this is a successful program. And we recognize that while the city has a role and you have provided the legal framework for this program to operate, it's really successful due to the community folks that have stepped up, community-supported shelters, Nightingale Health Sanctuary, and the services that work with those folks to make this a successful program for the residents, such as Occupy Medical and Whitebird. These photos represent the work that's being done on the Dusk to Dawn programs and overnight camping, car camping programs. These were taken at the service station operated by St. Vincent de Paul out on Highway 99. And as you know, you passed a pilot ordinance allowing for Dusk to Dawn sites to take place. The only one that operated this last winter was at St. Vincent de Paul at the service station, and that was running a few nights a week, was full each night that it ran, and they closed for the summer on March 31st with the intent to reopen next winter. There was also a car camping program that operated under the Dusk to Dawn ordinance at the behavioral health campus that Lane County owns, and that allowed for car campers to pull in each night, have a safe and legal place to sleep, and then they would vacate in the morning before staff came to the building. I'm going to turn it over to Jason.
Thank you, Mia. Again, my name is Jason Dedrick in the City Manager's Office. I'm going to talk briefly about 3 key programs that city staff have been working on. Again, these are kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are many other things happening, but these are 3 of the more recently prominent programs. So the first is Operation 365. Again, this began as the Mayor's Challenge to End Veterans Homelessness that was initiated by First Lady Michelle Obama. Our mayor was one of the first to sign up to that challenge, so we were kind of a leader in terms of a community on that effort. One of the things that we knew coming into that effort that we learned from our federal partners was it's very important to provide a tangible goal. Something like ending veterans homelessness can be difficult to quantify, and so the city manager launched Operation 365 with a definitive goal of housing 365 vets over the course of a year. So again, it was launched in November 2014. There are a lot of partners who are already working with veterans on issues related to homelessness. And I think one of the things that we learned was the need to leverage all of those efforts. So as more coordination began to happen between all those partners, they were able to learn about things where there may have been redundancies, where there may have been gaps, and they were able to be more efficient with their efforts. On From the city standpoint, we created a career development position in the city manager's office that lasted 12 months. That position essentially became a facilitative role for all of these other partners that were working. Became kind of a one-stop shop, one person that you could call if you were any of these entities or a veteran experiencing homelessness, one person to call who could help get you answers or point you in the right direction. And so that position ended at the end of last year, right about the time when we were declaring success on our goal. And you can see there 404 veterans housed during that period. So a successful program, perhaps more important than the success was what we learned. So I'll quickly talk about some of the things that we learned, because the hope was in targeting a specific and kind of tangible group of folks experiencing homelessness that we could learn some things we might scale up to the larger issue. So one of the most important ones that was achieved at the very end of the period for Operation 365 was a common registry of those experiencing homelessness who were veterans. So that means coordinating the efforts of the VA and the county to try to put a name on every person experiencing homelessness so that we can track their progress through the system, how they are, where they need assistance, where they've already been. And so that happened right at the end of the period, but it's a really key part of moving things like this forward. Again, communication with partners. There were weekly meetings between key partners. Always at those meetings there were new things that came up, new partnerships that could be expanded upon. So that was a key part of what we learned. The single point of contact was crucial. Having one person that folks could call on an effort that's as diffuse as homelessness is, often it can be important to know where to go, and so that was something important. Legal needs was something we learned. A lot of veterans who a barrier to achieving housing or kind of getting back on their feet was addressing legal needs that they may have had, so we were able to match them up with legal services. Being ready to rent was very important also. We worked a lot with property managers. We had veterans who had federal vouchers for housing, and we worked a lot with property managers to create opportunities for vets to go into existing units. And what we were able to find was that some folks had been experiencing homelessness for quite a period of time and weren't quite ready to rent yet. And so it's not enough to just say, I have a voucher and here's a place to go. It's about what does it mean to be ready to rent, to live in community again, to do things like pay utility bills and deal with a lease agreement. And so very important to focus on that. Touched on property managers. That continues to be very important. And then also Housing First units. So you passed a resolution on Monday regarding Housing First. And what we learned, a lot of veterans experiencing homelessness do have ongoing issues with substance abuse. And so when we have housing units that are only available to those that aren't currently experiencing those issues, it leaves a gap there. And so having Housing First units where folks who are experiencing those issues can still get housing becomes very important. Lastly, we tried to right-size our solutions as well. We learned a lot from our federal partners about what other cities were doing, a lot of those things were what larger cities were doing. And so we took a very Eugene kind of unique approach in saying we have a lot of housing stock that could potentially be converted to single-room occupancy. And so we ended up piloting a program that now other cities are calling us to talk about. So we tried to make it our own as well. Also, I'll mention that we do continue to have a lot of dedicated units that specifically support veterans related to VetLift and the Veterans Housing Project. So, a successful program that we're hoping to learn from as we go forward. Another program that we piloted in 2015 was the Parks Ambassador Program. The goal of this effort that was initiated by Parks and Open Space staff was to create a welcoming experience for visitors to parks, as well as connecting people to resources, whether those be visitors to parks or those who are in our parks experiencing homelessness, connecting them with resources. So in 2015, we had 2 ambassadors that worked in the park. Basically, they were on bikes all day long, every day, for a period of 4 months. They were out making contact with folks, handing out maps of the community, helping people find their way. They were reporting health and safety issues, helping to clean up debris associated with camping. They were supported extensively by police department bike teams as well. When there were issues that needed a different level of attention, those teams also supported that effort. Many of the folks that interacted with our Parks Ambassadors, matter of fact, over 3/4, reported a positive experience. So that was good news, and also meant that it moved from a pilot program in 2015 to becoming a 2-year program, and the intent of once again doing that this summer. So another successful program that kind of addresses the issue in a different way. Finally, want to quickly touch on the 15th Night Initiative. This is an effort to prevent youth homelessness. This was initiated by the city manager a couple of years ago in terms of getting some key partners together and starting to have some discussions. It's based in the fact that youth who spend more than 2 weeks on the street or experiencing homelessness have a much, much higher chance of becoming chronically homeless. Last year, there were about 273 students in either the 4J or the Bethel School District who were not living with a family member or a guardian. And so what this points out is that this is a very, this is a trackable group of folks that we have regular contact with through the school system. And last year, out of those 273, 90 of them dropped out of school. And so then we're left wondering, are these folks who then maybe began to experience homelessness? So this effort is to leverage existing services. So again, much like veterans homelessness, there are community partners working on the issue of youth homelessness. This is to leverage those existing services, create a focused effort, and then a community expectation around an outcome. Interestingly, this effort benefited from the creation of a mobile app at the Hack for a Cause for this year. This is an app that will alert providers of immediate needs and help them to coordinate more quickly when someone is experiencing homelessness. So that's a really exciting kind of synergy of some of the different efforts we have going on in our community. This work continues with a steering committee made up of representatives from various community partners, including providers, staff from both of the school districts, faith-based organizations. And then the goal of this is to launch this effort at the beginning of this school year, this coming school year, the 2016-2017 school year. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie Jennings, who's going to talk a little bit more about our housing programs related to homelessness.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I wanted to start by talking just briefly about some of the overall housing needs that we know about for folks living in Eugene. And as we talk with Human Service and homeless providers, one of the key issues that they repeatedly identify is access to affordable housing as a major concern for the folks that they serve. So as we look at the cost burdens experienced by people living in Eugene, we see that both low-income renters and low-income homeowners have significant cost burdens that can cause instability and sometimes ultimately homelessness. We also know that in addition to people experiencing homelessness, we have a number of special needs populations that are uniquely at risk of becoming homeless. And so many of our housing efforts are directed towards those special needs populations. Over time, Eugene has established quite a significant stock of affordable housing units. We have over 3,500 units in place at this point in time. Some of those developments are now almost 40 years old. And overall trends do point to continued growth in demand for rental units. This is part economics, part demographic issues, and so this is something that we expect to see more need for in the future. I am going to talk a little bit about our efforts to create new affordable housing and really trying to expand the options and opportunities. Some of this is information you have seen before, but really wanted to just try to kind of bring this to the current conversation related to homelessness. Our work over time has really tried to create a cost-effective and streamlined approach to developing affordable housing. The city's land banking program for affordable housing has been a cornerstone of this effort. And the goals of this are to create units that can leverage significant resources from outside of the community. So we're using our limited resources wisely. We're seeking to create opportunities throughout the entire community and have access to public transit and services. And what we're doing is layering the federal resources we receive with the system development charge waivers and tax exemptions to then go to the state and private entities that for larger projects are providing about 90% of the costs associated with those projects. In the consolidated plan that was adopted by Council last year, there is a goal of creating 650 units of affordable housing over a 5-year period. This goal was established with recognition for the average amount of money that we receive and also availability of low-income housing tax credits, which is at this point the primary mechanism for supporting affordable housing development. Just quickly looking at the land banking program, over time we've acquired over 90 acres of land, 23 projects, over 900 units, 48 units are under development, and we just acquired a new site on River Road. And we are actively looking for additional sites and really are looking for community partners, institutions that might have land that they're willing to sell to us at market value. So we look for any opportunities that you all or folks in the community can bring forward to us. Recent developments include Stellar Apartments, Willie Kenzie Crossing. The first phase of Baskin Village is now complete. The second phase is under construction. All of these units are really targeted to people earning very low incomes. They have set-asides of special needs units in each one, and frequently they are being coupled with other tenant-based assistance to help reach even lower in terms of reaching people with very low incomes or who are experiencing homelessness. The second area that I wanted to touch upon is our efforts to rehabilitate existing housing. As I mentioned, that stock of affordable housing we have is aging. And then we also have other units in the community that create opportunities to take market rate units and improve them and convert them to affordable housing units. Overall, the goal of this is to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable housing, to extend the life of the units, reduce energy costs and consumption. And we have made significant investments in the past in affordable housing, and we want to sustain those investments over time and preserve the places where low-income people are already living. The consolidated plan goal is to rehabilitate 350 rental units and 150 homeowner units in Eugene over the 5-year period. I want to go over some specific projects that have benefited from these multiple resources and also directly address some of the concerns that have been raised related to homelessness. This project, North Polk Apartments, is a partnership between Nedco and Looking Glass. We believe it's the first in the state that will provide supports to youth aging out of the foster care system. We know that some of the initial occupants came directly from homelessness to live in these units. So this is a very unique opportunity for them that also aligns with efforts around 15th Night. This was a combination of federal and local resources, and this is a case where we locally provided almost all of the resources for this particular project. Delta Court Apartments is another acquisition rehabilitation project by Cornerstone Community Housing. It will provide 8 transitional housing units for homeless families with children. It has been acquired. It's currently being rehabilitated at this point in time. Olive Plaza Apartments, many of you are familiar with this very tall building that's close to the Kiva. This provides 150 rental units for seniors earning below 50% of area median income. It is a unique asset in our community as it receives an ongoing federal rent subsidy that ensures that occupants pay no more than 30% of their income. And so even if they have a very low income, that means that they're going to have very, very low rent to live there. Our resource was a small part of a very large federal financing package to rehabilitate and preserve this development. Another similar type development that we are starting to explore rehabilitation of is Yapoa Terrace. Many of you received an invitation, all of you should have received an invitation to an event that the developers are holding next week to talk about the plans for rehabilitation and preservation of that affordable senior housing development also. The Emergency Home Repair Program. So this is one of the programs that we actually directly administer in the community, and so we work with homeowners and residents of manufactured home parks that own their units to make critical repairs to plumbing, roof, electrical, accessibility. These are really homelessness prevention efforts. And so as most of the people that we are supporting have monthly incomes of less than $1,000. So this is a partnership that we do work with EWEB on this effort, and typically support about 30 people per year, 30 households per year. I'd like to also touch upon human service operations. So in addition to the city general fund dollars, we do utilize CDBG funds each year to support critical human service operations. I'll be talking more about this during the budget committee, but I did just want to touch briefly on it in this presentation. And this is money that has been in place for many years, and we expect to continue this into the future. Another area, we talked about this a couple weeks ago when I came to council to talk about the action plan and substantial amendment, is human service capital facilities. This is a role that the city has played for a long time, and we've made a number of investments in human service facilities over time. We released an RFP in January and received a number of proposals that I'm going to briefly provide an overview of for you. But the purpose of this program is really to preserve and expand the physical capacity for human services, emergency, and shorter-term transitional housing. Within the consolidated plan, the council did adopt a goal of investing in 15 facilities over the next 5 years. And then with the action on April 25th, council established a pool of just over $1 million to support the proposals that came in through the RFP, and we will be coming back to council with specifics on those projects. I'll give you some highlights of the applications that we received in just a moment. One of the projects that is actually underway at this point is improvements to the St. Vincent de Paul service station on Highway 99, which provides critical facilities that not only provide day access facilities, but when we're talking about the dusk to dawn, these are the bathrooms that those folks are using. These are the showers that those folks are using. And this facility has received multiple CDBG investments over time. The picture on the bottom shows the kitchen that was created using CDBG funds several years ago, and work will be underway shortly to make improvements to the bathroom, shower, and laundry facilities on site there. Proposals that we received in the current RFP, there were 3 proposals to help preserve existing shelter facilities. So we have a number of small shelter facilities in the community that serve special needs, special populations. And so the first proposal we received was from Shelter Care to support their homeless medical recuperation program, which is an innovative partnership between Shelter Care and Peace Health. to support people coming out of the hospital system who do not have a place to live. In all of these cases, we're looking at improvements like roof, HVAC systems, kitchen upgrades and repairs to really just make sure that these facilities can continue to operate and benefit their intended populations over time. The second is also from Shelter Care for their Housing Health and Wellness Program. This is a facility that was formerly known as the Family Shelter, but has shifted in its purpose due to changes in the operational funding. But they do provide 26 units for homeless persons and people with special needs. The third facility is the Looking Glass Stepping Stone facility, which provides housing and services for 35 male youth offenders with special needs. This facility is also known as McKay Lodge. Again, needing roof, HVAC, kitchen repairs so that they can continue to offer these services. In addition, we received 2 other proposals for day access centers and human service centers. The first was from Catholic Community Services for their service station or their access center on West 6th. This facility provides food and other services to over 20,000 people per year. They are seeking funding for a new cooler so that they can expand offerings of fresher foods to people who come there for food boxes, and also to create additional spaces for counseling and other services. The Head Start Whitaker School currently serves almost 200 children daily, provides over 4,000 meals per month. This facility is in need of roof repairs, kitchen repairs, and other improvements so that they can also continue to operate over time. Lifting up to the work of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, I wanted to provide some high-level information about the work of the Poverty and Homelessness Board. Mayor Piercy is the city's designated representative on this, and I have served as a staff representative for the past 2 years and have watched the emergence of this group over time. It has been quite an undertaking and aligns with the county's role in coordinating the provision of human service funding as the county receives multiple federal and state grants for human services. It does bring together folks who represent workforce, justice, health, school systems, and there are a number of conversations that have been initiated about how to address homelessness throughout the county as a whole. The group initiated a strategic planning process to identify goals and strategies, and so I'm going to provide a high-level overview of those, in particular those that relate to shelter and addressing homelessness. So there are 3 primary goals. The first is increase availability and access to coordinated supportive housing, shelter, and services. They have set a goal of creating 600 additional housing opportunities for chronically homeless people and those with special needs. And this is a goal for creating these units throughout Lane County. In addition, they are seeking to create additional emergency shelter and respite care for homeless individuals, youth, and families with children, and to enhance services for frequent users through integration and coordination among human service, health, and justice systems, as we know that there are people in our community that are interacting with all of these systems, but we don't always know that or know how best to coordinate their needs across those systems and address their needs across those systems. The second goal area focuses more broadly on how do we prevent homelessness and poverty, and includes strategies related to workforce development, affordable housing, education. And then the third goal area is inform and enhance public awareness related to homelessness and poverty, recognizing that there is a need for ongoing conversations about homelessness and poverty and helping people to understand how it comes about. Lifting up even further, looking at the state of Oregon, and in the past 2 years, there has been a significant amount of activity occurring at the state related to issues of housing and homelessness. And I think we can expect that we will see even more activity in the next legislative session. I wanted to briefly highlight some of the key changes that have occurred in the past 2 years. So we have seen multiple bills that have been passed and signed during the past 2 legislative sessions. One that has directly resulted in more money for services in Lane County is increases in funding to the Emergency Housing Account and State Homeless Assistance Program. This has created just over $1 million in new funds for Lane County that Lane County staff are currently working on how to distribute. Another resource is $60 million in additional funding for affordable housing for families at risk of homelessness and persons with mental illness. Like other housing resources, this money will be distributed through statewide notice of fund availability processes. So prospective projects will have to apply to the state and compete for those resources. But this does represent a significant new investment that can benefit development of affordable housing in Lane County. Third area is limitations on rent increases, as well as ongoing legislation for local housing incentive and funding mechanisms. So this is also changing some of the fundamentals of our housing markets. And right now, working groups are already forming to start working on legislative concepts for the next session. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Mia.
I'll wrap up really quickly to say this is a photo of the mayor when back in December of 2015 she was invited to a summit of West Coast mayors that included Portland, San Francisco, Seattle, and LA. They tackled 2 topics over the course of 2 days. One was climate change and one was homelessness. And so this tells you that other communities are really thinking about this and recognize it as one of their primary challenges. And then finally, other communities often look to Eugene. Most recently, we had the city of Boulder visit. Both elected officials, staff, and community partners came to talk with our elected officials and executive team about solutions that we're finding. They too are facing the challenge of trying to strike a balance between long-term solutions and solutions that provide immediate relief to homeless folks. On the bottom, Councilor Taylor is chatting with one of the delegates, and on the top left, Eric DeBurr of Community Supported Shelters was providing a tour to a group of the folks that came to visit. We do want to turn your attention to 3 upcoming meetings that are relevant to this topic. On May 16th, we've scheduled a work session on the community justice system, which closely aligns with the work that we're doing as outlined here. On May 18th, the Budget Committee will receive a presentation on on human services funding, and on May 19th, the Poverty and Homelessness Board will have their next meeting. That's all we have today.
That was a lot. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the whole idea of this was to try to give you at least as much as they could, kind of a baseline of what's going on that you can take with you into your budget conversations. So I've got Mike and Chris. Mike?
First of all, Mayor, I appreciate that, but I would strongly request that we not have a 45-minute update on something in the future that doesn't give us a chance to have a discussion about the appropriate response, doesn't give us a chance to have, especially in front of Budget Committee, an opportunity for council to have a discussion about whether or not we agree with the approach that's being taken. And we don't have any time for that discussion now. And so we'll do it, I suppose, at Budget Committee. But I had a number of questions I was hoping we were going to get to today, and I'm not going to start down that road where we don't really even have time. And I'm really disappointed in that, because I have some ideas I think that we should be discussing at the policy level with regard to our approach here. So, thanks.
Bruce?
I'm okay. In the interest of time, yeah, I would, actually, they presented a lot of what I would have talked about.
Thank you. Okay. So, George, sorry.
I just have a real quick question. I see on the highlights of the homelessness count that 2,156 homeless students attended public school in Lane County. Do we have any breakdown? I mean, how many in Eugene? I imagine most of them are in Eugene.
We can get back to you with that information.
Okay. Yeah, it's not crucial, obviously, but I would like to know. Thank you.
Where?
I had a question, too. Why would the rest stops not be counted as emergency shelter instead of as unsheltered? Is there a criteria for what the emergency shelter is counted as?
So emergency shelter is where you are physically sheltered, so you have a roof, you're in a heated, you have access to bathroom facilities, and so they do distinguish between that kind of outdoor versus indoor.
Yeah. And I, too, would have liked to have had more time for a discussion, maybe not for the same reasons as Councilor Clark, but because I would like this council to be discussing how we're approaching this and what we think as a body the approaches are. I mean, I support pretty much the direction we're in, but I think it's important as a council that we have that conversation. And I recognize we had, a robust topic with the prior one, and there's a lot of information here, so I do appreciate that. And I hope also to bring some of the legislative changes you mentioned about local action we can take into our coming discussion around protecting affordable rental units and affordability for neighborhoods that might experience economic pressures in the future.
So in response to what I heard here, City Manager, I wonder if, so we're going to have a budget discussion tonight. Is there a place where we can have more robust discussion about this issue that feeds into the meetings that we have, budget meetings that we have?
I think it'll just depend on what the desire is. We didn't anticipate this was the end-all conversation on this topic. I suppose if the question is moving into the budget, does council want to be able to have a conversation that might inform the budget separate from the budget committee? We can try to find a time for that.
I think that's what I heard, right?
Yeah, at a policy level, I wonder if we're approaching this the appropriate way at some fundamental levels.
So we'll look at the schedule and see what we can figure out here.
Yes, we'll try to find a time sometime in the next 2 weeks to have it.
Next 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, the budget committee only lasts over the next couple of weeks, and so.
So the challenge with that always is we can look for some place to schedule, but then people have to have the room in their own schedules to attend as well. So thank you for that. I appreciate the update on all of these things. Thank you all.